The Holy Gospel according to Mark, the 10th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
On the way to Jerusalem, the disciples asked Jesus to grant them seats of honor. Jesus responds by announcing that he and his followers will rule through self-giving service. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And Jesus said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." Now when the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise
to you, O Christ. Good morning. Thanks. I am Pastor Kelly Bayer Derrick. I'm an assistant to the bishop here in the Virginia Synod. I've been serving in the bishop's office since January 1st, serving with Bishop Humphrey. I live in Roanoke and work out of the Salem office of the bishop. We also have an eastern office of the bishop. It's literally down the hall here at First Norfolk. And Pastor John Wirtz is an assistant to the bishop who works primarily out of the east, and Bishop Humphrey works kind of designated out of his home office in Harrisonburg. But all three of us serve the whole of the synod based on the various ministries with which we are engaged. One of the ways that I get to serve the synod is I get to be in your congregation. So I'm out and about on every Sunday I'm somewhere in the life of the synod, and it is a real joy to gather together with you all in worship, to gather for conversation, to have a cup of coffee and just hang out. It's especially fun for me to be in congregations where I have personal connections, and I was married in this sanctuary these many years ago when my husband, who is Pastor David Derrick, was a member here way back when he graduated from college and moved out to Tidewater and worshiped here. So we got married in this sanctuary. So it was fun. I was working out of the office here during this week, and during one of the days I stood back at that back door and reminisced, standing back there 20 plus years ago, and my dad saying to me, "Are you sure?" I said, yes. And, so that it's fun. Again, it's just fun to be here and be in this place and worship with you all. So my husband David still serves in Roanoke at St. Philip in Roanoke. I live in Roanoke. We have 3 sons. My sons especially enjoy when they get to be in the sermon. They don't actually, but they're not here, so we're not going to tell them, right? So, so I have 3 sons. My oldest son is a junior at Roanoke College. My middle son just started his first year at James Madison University, and my youngest son is a junior in high school. And one of the joys of having my kids be that age is all of them get to drive. So whenever we go somewhere as a family, there's a mad dash for 2 things. The first is to grab the keys and be the one who gets to drive. The second is to be the one who sits in the passenger seat. So usually as we're heading out the door, you know what gets yelled as you're trying to claim the passenger seat? Shotgun, right? So they're yelling shotgun, and whoever is not the driver, those two are quite literally arguing to be in this place of honor. They're pushing each other out of the way, slamming the door shut so that they can't get in. By the chuckles, there's a chance you all have experienced a similar phenomenon. And so it goes on, and it makes me laugh because, like, on the one hand, we're all getting in the car, right? We're all going to the same place. But I get it, though, because really it's not about riding up front. Usually. It might be. My oldest son is pretty tall, and sometimes he likes that extra leg room. But a lot of times being up front is about being in control. Because whoever's up front gets to be radio captain, and whoever's up front gets to give directions to the driver just in case they're not sure where they're going. The person up front gets to be in charge. And before I chastise my kids too much, I have to confess that I also like to be in charge. I totally get that. Maybe it's the oldest child in me or just the human in me that I like to be in control. And my guess is that many of you, at least on occasion, might have a similar experience of liking to be the one in charge. So really, my boys are just living the way most of us live a lot of times, because our culture tells us that it's really important to be in charge, right? We want to be the leader. In our American culture, being the leader means having the power. So we strive to be the line leader, the class president, the team captain. Our culture tells us that what's most important is that you are the CEO, the supervisor, the manager, that you're the one in charge. We're taught from really early on that leadership involves power and privilege and honor. But Jesus has a different definition of leadership, doesn't he? It's important to note, first of all, that Jesus agrees that it is good to be a leader. It's just a matter of how one leads that Jesus talks about. Jesus says that a leader is a person who puts the needs and wants of others before their own. Jesus says that being a leader means being a servant. Like James and John and so many others before us, I often want to sit in the place of honor, privilege, prestige. But Jesus reminds the disciples, both then and now, because we are all disciples, that true leadership is not about power. True leadership is not about privilege. In the first century, there were those leaders who lorded their power over others. We have those same sorts of leaders today, don't we? We can be those same sorts of leaders today, can't we? I can. We have many leaders who seem to care more about maintaining their own power and privilege than they do about ensuring that others are cared for, that others have enough to eat and drink, that others have homes, as one of our youngest teachers reminded us this morning, that all people can earn a fair and just wage, that all voices are heard and honored, that conversation and compromise and working together for the greater good is paramount. Jesus' definition of leadership is not like our worldly definition of leadership. Jesus says that the great ones are not those who are tyrants over others. Rather, Jesus commends servant leadership. Whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, Jesus says. Whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. That definition of leadership is hard, right? Holy moly, because we're not conditioned to be servants. We're not conditioned to be slaves of all. And yet Jesus said, this is what it means to lead, to serve, to be bound to another in service to them. Jesus tells his disciples, and again, this means us too, it is not so among you. It is not so among you that your leaders are those who lord it over others. It is not so among us that our leaders are tyrants. It should not be so among us. rather among us, among those who follow Jesus. Leadership is about servanthood. Leadership is about being enslaved to God, being bound to God's will and not our own. This is what it means to lead for those of us who follow Jesus. And this last part's really important, y'all, because it's Jesus who shows us what it means to serve. The servanthood of Jesus is seen most especially on the cross. On the cross, in obedience to and in bondage to God's will, Jesus dies for the sake of all humanity. On the cross, Jesus shows us God's steadfast, endless, compassionate love for all of us, for each of us, for all of you, for each of you. The cross is God's redemptive, liberative act on our behalf. The cross is God's salvation. The cross is God's love, God's servanthood, God's leadership. On the cross, Jesus shows us most explicitly what it means to serve, to give one's life for another. I don't think that's what James and John had in mind when they asked to sit at Jesus' right and his left. I don't think they quite understood that Jesus' true glory is revealed on the cross, and that those who sit at his right and at his left are those who are crucified with him. Jesus knows and challenges them and us to consider that it might be kind of hard to drink this cup that Jesus is talking about, to take up one's cross, quite literally, and sit at the right and left of Jesus. And that makes sense, right? Because it's hard. It's hard to give our lives for another, isn't it? It's hard to serve in a way that means we truly put others ahead of ourselves, or at least as equal to ourselves. That's hard, y'all. Even when we strive to serve others, we can run the risk of trying to be first, rather than really living in service to and with one another. So I was watching a sketch by the comedy duo Key and Peele recently, and Key and Peele are hilarious. But in this sketch, it's called Workplace Altruism. So in this sketch, Jordan Peele brings a cup of coffee in the office to welcome the new guy in the office, Keegan-Michael Key, and just says, "Oh, I'm just doing this. This is what I do for my fellow humans." Which makes Key respond with a thank you and a come-uppance, offering to take Peele out to a 2-martini lunch that he'll pay for. Which makes Peele offer to give his upcoming promotion to Key. So Key says, "Well, I'm going to start my own company, and I'm going to make you the CEO, and I'll just be the vice president, because that's what I do for my fellow humans." And it goes on and on and on, each of them trying to show how much better they are at being nice, at being helpful, at being welcoming. And again, it's hilarious, but it's also really telling about the ways that we are so trained to strive to be better than other people. The ways that we're trained, that we're raised, that we're taught to be the best, to be bigger, to be stronger, faster, etc. Even when we're trying to help other people, trying to serve, sometimes we drift into that self-centered sin. It's so hard to serve as Christ serves. But service to one another isn't about being first. Service to one another isn't about our power, our position, our privilege. That is not Christ-like service. Christ-like service is so countercultural. Christ-like service is walking with people who are hurting, accompanying those who are working for justice, being present with those who are lonely and grieving, allying ourselves with those whose voices are often not heard. One such voice is my friend Lisa. I spent the weekend with her. She's a friend of mine from college and lives in Suffolk. Lisa serves God and her neighbor by advocating for women and girls who are trafficked by others, trafficked right here in Tidewater. She allies her voice with those voices that are not often heard because these women have been abused and neglected and used and disrespected by so many people that they often feel less than human. So Lisa leads by serving, She follows Jesus by allying her voice with these women, by working for protection and restorative justice for these women. I am humbled by her servant leadership. Another way we can practice Christ-like servant leadership is by calling on our elected leaders to ensure that all people, regardless of where they live and who they are, have the opportunity to reach their God-given potential. This is Bread for the World's offering of letters, which this congregation, which y'all participated in today. This offering of letters reminds those of us who follow Jesus that we are called to speak up. We are called to stand with our neighbors. We are called to put our faith into action by advocating for others. Servant leadership, those who follow Jesus, we are called to pray, to fast, and to act in solidarity with our brothers and our sisters who are often on the margins. We're called to remind our elected leaders that those who lead do not lord it over others, but instead that true greatness comes in service. An offering of letters enables us to use our voices, to call on our leaders in Congress to protect vital programs for people who struggle with hunger and poverty every single day. You all also have many opportunities, I know, to help those who struggle with hunger and poverty every single day. One of them we just heard about this morning. Thanksgiving baskets for Ghent area ministries. Walking with, serving with your neighbors who struggle to have food every day. We were gathered this morning in conversation, and I heard about the ministry of this congregation to make 125 quilts in anticipation of and celebration of your 125th anniversary next year. And for those quilts to literally accompany our neighbors, to wrap them in the love of God. That is a way you can advocate, you can care for, you can practice servant leadership. There are so many ways that we can practice servant leadership. Because whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, Jesus says. Whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. Following Jesus is not a competition. Following Jesus is not about power and privilege. Following Jesus is not about being first. Following Jesus is about servant leadership. Following Jesus is about compassion and justice, mercy, hope, love. Amen.